And now, it's time for TJwow.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Training Journal webinars. We've got one every day this week, and we've been absolutely inundated with amazing feedback, so thank you so much. This is me. I'm your host. I'm the Deputy Editor of Training Journal, but also today we're very lucky. We've got with us Debbie Carter, who is our wonderful and esteemed editor, and she'll be definitely contributing to the session today. And on the back channel on Twitter, we also have Mary, who is our assistant editor as well. So if you want to go and look at the tweets, you can do. If you're not on Twitter, that's fine. You can just stay here in the chat window. Now, the way that we approach our Training Journal webinars is a little different perhaps from other webinars that you've experienced. We don't have any presentations to be delivered. We don't have any of those kind of agendas. We just want to be open, objective, and we want to have conversation. I always think the best part of any event is actually that deep quality conversation. That's always where I learn most, and that's what I'm really hoping we'll get out of today, is really good quality discussion. So you've got that chat window that you can use. Please do go and type anything in there you like, to each other, to our speakers, to me. Just have some conversation amongst yourself. Also, we've got a question and answer pod. So if you haven't seen that before, you can just go and type a question in there, and that will make sure I see that, and we can make sure we cover it as best we can. So please do that if you'd like to ask a question. Also, if you're thinking, yeah, my microphone's connected, you can click the raise hand icon and it will alert me and will encourage you to open your microphone, or you can just let us know in the chat window. All of that is absolutely fine. You can join us on Twitter. As we've said, we really enjoy the Twitter conversation. It's been very useful. And I'd just like to highlight that TJwow, as we're calling it, is it's sponsored by Give Back UK. And what Give Back UK are doing is creating inspirational video learning library, which is free to everyone in the third sector. And they are launching next month. All of our sessions, as I say, they're going to be recorded. They're all available online, and you can go and see those a little bit later on if you want to go and have a look, and some videos of up-and-coming sessions as well. But most importantly, what we are here for today is to talk to Tim Royds and Clare O'Shea. And the whole topic here is about sales training. And the question we're asking, we want to have a look at today, is just who is responsible for sales training? Is it internal learning and development? Is it an external consultancy? What do we need to take into consideration? So that's what we're focusing on. We're going to get some introductions from Tim and Clare in just a second. Now let me bring on some webcams to the session, because I think it's nice to see everybody. So here we go. You should be able to see now Tim with a lovely thumbs up there, and we've got Clare as well, looking delightful in blue, and you've got me as well. So Tim and Clare, welcome to the webinar, and thank you so much for your time today. Tim, just a very short introduction from you, please. What do you do, and what's your kind of area in sales? What do you focus on?
First challenge, keep it short. My job is very simply B2B sales trainer stroke sales consultant, so I engage with an enormous variety of different companies and different industries, and my basic remit is to help people sell more effectively, sell more efficiently. So I get involved with designing and implementing bespoke training solutions, coaching, mentoring, and sometimes even partnering with organizations to help them design and develop their own internal interventions, which are then implemented internally by them. It's very short for me.
So it's fair to say you've got a fair bit of experience there then, Tim, I think, isn't it?
Well, yeah, my background is entirely sales, so I've also seen it from the point of view of being a frontline salesperson, sales manager, internal sales trainer, and full-time field-based coach. So yeah, I've seen it from a lot of different perspectives over the years.
That's brilliant, thank you. Now we've lost Clare off webcam, but she's still here. Clare, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. I don't know what happened there. So technology always have a problem. Okay, there we are. Hi there.
The joys of technology. So Clare, tell us a little bit about what you do in sales.
Okay, hang on. So my background's actually in IT sales. selling IT solutions. So what I tend to specialise over the last 10 or 15 years, I specialise in helping organisations improve their sales performance, but mainly through long-term, complex B2B sales. That's the area I like to specialise in. But like to know a lot of it is about mindset, skills, process, and key account management as well. Primarily in technical industries, I tend to focus on those a little bit more, but all sorts of industries, of course.
Gosh, again, really kind of broad experience and background there. Thank you so much for both coming along. And I think it's a really important area that we focus on here around what's going on with sales. So that basic question is, who's responsible for sales? Now, I'm not a salesperson myself, although I've done some of that in various parts of my career. And I've been certainly in learning and development roles where I've been the person training the salespeople. And I'll admit it, I've not done a great job. I'd like to say I've learned from things. And it's all part of the learning curve of our industry. Thank you, Tim. But also, I've had external consultants come in and done brilliant sales training. And I've had external consultants come in and done kind of good training in and off the day, but it hasn't really been linked in with what the business is about and that overarching theme and theory of what the sales department's all about. So Claire, first of all, what's your first initial reaction to that question of who's responsible for?
My first thoughts is that it's all about really creating a sustainable behaviour change. We're trying to change the skills long term, so that people can improve what they do, not just in the short-term bit of skills. Because the big issue is your best salespeople may not be your best salespeople. They may just be lucky. Now, if somebody consistently does well in an industry, then they're probably doing the right things over a long period of time. Because if they're consistently doing a good thing, they're probably. So therefore, I really feel quite strongly that it's probably the best combination is a sort of tripartite system, whereby you would have a sales practitioner. I do think a sales practitioner of some sort, someone who understands the sales industry. And it does seem to have had experience of sales, seems to make a big difference. That doesn't mean to say that someone who hasn't done that couldn't do it, but I haven't come across anybody yet. And I also manage the global sales training for Fujitsu Services for about 2 years. So I've had experience of employing people like me. So I think one is a sales expert, sales practitioner, whatever you want to call us. The other one is, of course, L&D, because I think L&D has so much to give, because they understand the profession of learning and should be the latest up to skills of that. And I think the third one is the sales manager, or maybe a bigger terminology would be the business themselves. So there needs to be a business sponsor, which is probably the sales manager, sales director, or managing director. So it's the business, L&D, and the sales practitioner. That's my first thought. But I'd be willing to be persuaded after this discussion today. I'm quite open-minded. That's my line in the sand.
I like your line in the sand. That is a great place to start. Thank you so much. Tim?
Well, I've got a very clear opinion on the answer to the question, who is responsible for sales training? And it comes down to asking who is the one person who is going to live or die by the results of the sales team, and that's the sales manager. So logically, therefore, because the sales manager is totally reliant on the results of their team, they have to be ultimately responsible for sales training. However, that doesn't necessarily mean that they do it. Sales managers, although we have got the classic player manager model in some organisations where the sales manager is responsible for both their sales team and they have their own sales target as well. But strictly speaking, when we're talking about sales management, the job is about achieving through others. That's what it's there for. So equally, whilst I believe the sales manager should be responsible for sales training, it doesn't necessarily mean that they do it. And they can call upon the expertise of a lot of other people, such as internal colleagues and external consultants. Now, when it comes down to actually pulling the whole thing together, I must admit I've got a lot of sympathy with Claire's view here. It has to be a tripartite thing. The sales manager can't do it on their own because they're not experts on how people learn and how people grow and how people develop. You need expertise on those issues. Equally, I think this term sales training can be a little bit misleading because it's rather like saying to a sports coach, well, we'd like somebody to get better at athletics. Well, what does that mean? You know, we're talking shot put, we're talking marathon, we're talking sprint. What exactly are we talking about here? So to say we need sales training is very similar. What are we talking about? We're talking about a transactional market, a relationship market, internal, inbound calls, outbound calls. If we're talking about a call center, we're talking about consultative selling. We're talking about account management, which is different to key account management, and then there's the overlap to global account management, etc., etc. So you do need somebody who's got the sales expertise as well to pin those things down. So yeah, I'd say ultimately it needs to be the sales manager who is responsible, but who calls on expertise related to both how people learn, so that that part can happen properly, and understanding exactly what's needed in terms of extra skills, knowledge, ability.
Well, that's that problem solved then. So what are we going to do for the next 45 minutes, everyone? No, there is. I think you both bring out some really important points about the responsibility of leading through others and achieving through others. And I think actually that's probably any manager or any leader at any point in an organisation, that's their job, is to achieve through others. So there's a synergy there. I think also it's really interesting the point you're making about the practitioner experience as well. Claire,
yeah, I just think I've noticed that I think the other point outside it, those are the three personal areas. There is another big area, particularly to do with sales, and that's the whole thing to do with process and systems and CRM and so forth. And I noticed that in the chat that Geraldine Locke has commented on the enablement. So quite often what we're seeing is a head of sales process or a head of sales enablement. And maybe that's where the responsibility sits. It's an interesting discussion. I'm not sure, so I'm being a bit devil's advocate a little bit, should it really, because I've had an L&D hat on in the past as well, as you know, as the head of sales training at Fujitsu, should it actually be the L&D? Because L&D's responsibility is the skills of the people, the retention of the people, and recruiting the people-ish. I'm sure there's a lot more, obviously. Sales is about sales performance, and sales training, sales content was just one part of improving the sales performance, as well as coaching and process and all those other things. And that's why it's difficult to say whose ultimate responsibility is. If anything, it should sit under L&D, should. But again, they shouldn't have to necessarily do it, but the sales managers are absolutely responsible for ensuring the performance of their salespeople, in the same way the manager or finance person is responsible for that. But they've got the number and the overall arching. So it's interesting that who should have ultimate responsibility, and that's the problem, is that if we get into that one person should have it, then people back away and it gets a bit confusing. In the organisations where the three parts work together with process as well, it seems to work better. And of course, when things are out of kilter, it'd be interesting if you looked at it as a balance thing. When there's too much process, that doesn't work either, because then all the salespeople have to do is fill in all the forms, and they're not out there selling and talking to their customers. So it's an interesting one if you have this discussion of ultimately who should actually be responsible. Because the next point I would make is maybe it's the individual person. It's all about taking ownership of your own development, and that's the way the future's going, choosing what you do. The real big challenge actually though is that most salespeople, shocking, most salespeople have no sales training. Unfortunately, I've got any stats here. I do know that from the Chally Worldwide group, which was a global research on the biggest organisations worldwide, they're saying the average salesperson spends approximately 33 hours per annum training. In my anecdotal over the last 5-10 years, I would say of the people I go in, the industries change a lot, of course. The industries change a lot. A lot of sales people get no sales training. They're saying, here's a list of customers, good luck. And that's shocking, really.
Well, I'd say, Claire, even more shocking than that is the situation we've got with a lot of sales managers. I mean, we've got the problem where people are promoted to a sales manager role because they've been good in sales, which is absurd. It's a different job. It's a different set of competencies and abilities. And a good sales manager is not necessarily a good salesperson or vice versa. But that on one side, they wake up one morning, it's a little bit like kneeling down and having somebody tap them on both shoulders with a sword, arise, Sir Sales Manager, and off you go with no training. And that is normally the case. It's crackers, absolutely crackers. I'd like to pick up on the comment about a process as well that Geraldine originally raised. There can sometimes be a knee-jerk reaction that because results aren't quite what they should be, crikey, we'd better go and train the team. And sometimes that is not necessarily the right answer. Sometimes it can be a change in the sales process that actually produces the results. With the same skill set, the same knowledge set, but a slight tweak in the process can produce the results. Or it could be a change of market focus, or it could be something like a change in the environment around the sales team, which is a little bit of an all-encompassing word and phrase, because that includes things like incentive programs, how people are recognised, etc., etc. So when the sales manager comes to HR internally or an external consultant, there needs to be somebody there who has sufficient understanding of sales to be able to challenge and say, hang on a minute, before we begin to look at a training solution, let's get to the root cause of what is causing this issue, what's causing this challenge within the business, which probably brings us back to what is the critical point. Before leaping to the answer of, well, is it going to be internal L&D or an external consultancy that's going to help on this occasion? Before we even begin to answer that question, let's pin down the key question, which is, what's the issue? What are we trying to achieve here? It's only when those questions have been answered that you can then look around and begin to look at options and alternatives and decide what's going to be the most appropriate and effective approach.
Yeah, I absolutely support what you said there, Tim. It's quite interesting. I had a sales director the other day, and after the end of the conversation, I said, well, it sounds like you've got a motivation issue. Your process is after the conversation, several hours conversation. The process is good, the salespeople's skills were good, but they'd had a lot of changes, and they'd acquired various companies, and it was team spirit and it was motivation, in my opinion. I said, you better spend the money doing that. You don't need to train anybody. So again, it's that knee-jerk of that's the answer. And of course, as we know, it's not always about training. We've talked about training in its wider sense. I assume we're talking about development, really, because in actual fact, the big growth area, of course, is coaching. It's getting more coaching. There's lots of different ways of doing it. Support, mentoring, action planning, groups, sharing successes, and all those things make a massive difference as well.
Yeah, I've had two really interesting instances over the years where I've been asked to engage with clients. We've had that first meeting, and the more the conversation's gone on, the more it's become clear. It's the drivers within the business that are causing the problem, not a lack of skill. And yeah, you can give people all the skills in the world, but if the drivers within the business are going to punish them for doing what they're supposed to be doing, you're not going to have the result that you need. And
yeah, I think all these are really important points, and I think I'd like to focus just for a moment on that point about the business need and what's driving that. Now, in the chat window, guys, I'd love you to use the chat window. I mean, this is absolutely fascinating conversation, but your comments and your questions are really going to drive this forward. Now, Debbie, in the chat window, you've said a couple of things about challenging the business and getting involved with the business needs and stuff like that. It would be great, Debbie, if you could come off mute, just press that unmute button. I'm going to bring your picture in as well so people can see you. Just tell us a little bit more about what you think about L&D in the business and in this conversation.
Becoming business partners, which is really the future for them, because the old traditional trainer who was transactional is long gone, and if they want a future, they really need to be much more involved in the business, actually finding out what the business needs. And as I've said, sales is a crucial part, not one of the most crucial part of success of a business. That's what adds to the bottom line. And L&D need to be more courageous in actually going into sales departments and talking to the leaders, the teams, to find out how things are going, what are the blocks to success. And as Tim and Claire both said, often it isn't a training issue, it's a process issue, a lack of communication, which it is with so much, really. And L&D departments need to be actually taking a much broader view of what they do. They need to be more consultants, and they need to be having really challenging conversations with their business, and a really important part of that business is going to be sales.
Agreed, Debbie. You need to have a fundamental understanding of sales, but what we're talking about here are just good questioning skills and listening skills, and an appetite to understand the needs of the business. You haven't necessarily got to be a salesperson or an expert in sales to be able to sit down with a manager in the business and ask questions like, well, what potentially is driving this? Why do you say that skill is important? How will that impact on results? You haven't got to be an expert on sales to ask those sorts of questions, but they can be quite important questions to provoke thought in whoever has come to you with the training need, in inverted commas, in the first place.
Exactly, and I think that it's having those challenging conversations, working out other possible solutions. But at the end of the day also, L&D people need to know their industry, so that when there is a need to actually develop people, they know the best places to go to get that support. And it may be external, like people like yourself. It may be that there's room to develop the leaders within the team, to coach and mentor or whatever. So there are a multitude of solutions there that they need to be aware of, and actually seeing it as a training solution is often people jump to that first of all, and actually often it's further down the line, and you get a much more successful outcome by making sure all the other elements are working as they should be.
Yeah, and see, the other thing that we're blessed with today is the extraordinary ability that we have to reach out to fellow professionals. So if you are somebody in HR and you have been approached by, and I'm just going to take a theoretical example here, you have been approached by somebody internal that says, oh, we've got a sales training need, and you're not too sure what questions to ask. Well, why not get onto the TJ forum and post something there and ask for some help and advice on what questions to ask? Or there's a multitude of groups on LinkedIn, some of which are specialist sales trainers, where again you could post something absolutely free of charge, and I'm sure get a huge amount of really constructive advice.
I mean, yesterday we did have a session on, the social media, as it's important in your career development, but I think this just takes it to the next stage of how it can help you in understanding specifics, and actually building your network to have people that you can go to with a problem, and perhaps then come back to the business and try again, because I think that's really, L&D have to have a much broader role than they ever had before. I'm not saying that there wasn't a need for specialist sales training, but L&D need to be much more aware of when that needs to be called upon, and they also need to understand the processes of the business across the board. As somebody said in the chat room, it's not just sales. It could be operations, it can be legal services, finance, IT, any of those elements. But they need to be aware of all of them, because that's their role. But I'll bow out here and leave it to other people, because I'm sure there's plenty of other. I know Geraldine's probably got things she might like to add.
On the back of what you were saying there, Debbie, as well, I know there's a lot of discussion at the moment, probably increasing amounts of discussion about the role of L&D as curator rather than just the continual provider of courses, because there's a lot of material already out there. And maybe this is part of the mindset, that the role isn't necessarily to provide training all the time, but the role is to be able to pin down absolutely, first of all, what the need is, what the issue is, what the problem is, what the challenge is, and then look around at the options and alternatives and have a knowledge of where to go to look for those options and alternatives before recommending the best way forward for whoever the sponsor is of the potential training need.
Definitely.
I think isn't the challenge though, is L&D, they're specialists in L&D, so I absolutely agree they need to understand more about the business, but how much more are they going to understand about all those parts of the business when they're specialists in one area? So their skills are more about doing the needs analysis as opposed to necessarily understanding the detail of it and working with experts, practitioners and so forth. Because it's a tough one. And it's interesting how HR become more business partners in the organisation. So that's a trend we're seeing. And the trend, and certainly from the CIPD survey from last year, linking with some of the words that Tim said, it's all about L&D becoming much more, they use the word a learning community manager, or creating a learning culture. And so that brings me back to the point of, we give the answer knee-jerk reaction that it's training too quickly quite often when training's not the answer. But let's put that to one side and let's assume training is part of the answer. The other issue I think that happens a lot is people think training is the answer, maybe training is the answer, but training is only ever a small part of the answer. Because in order to make training work, it's all about the actions beforehand, the follow-up afterwards, the building into their KPIs of behaviours and so forth. So it's all that stuff. And we know that the success rate, 70% of the learning takes place outside of the classroom anyway. So even when it is training, I think we've had sales training companies in the past that when we, I'm using my L&D hat on for a minute, when I had my L&D hat on and approached people, they'd say, yes, I've got the programme for you, here it is, and yes, they might tailor it a bit, but it tends to be a 1, 2 day, 5 day programme, maybe with an extra day at the end. But there's very little discussion about who's going to coach them internally and how are they going to coach them, who's going to train the coaches to make sure they coach them on the right content and do all the package around the whole thing. Then it carries on, and it's not one size, obviously not one size fits all, but it is genuinely a journey of learning, isn't it? And then that brings in all the social networks. So there's an awful lot of stuff taken into place, and that's where L&D can really add. They should be the ones challenging, I think, some of us sales trainers to say, it's not just about the course. Yes, the course is important. That's just the starter, and it's just one thing amongst many other things. And I know that the way Tim works, having worked with him in the past, and hopefully I do this as well, of course, is we say to customers, actually, if you want real change in behaviour and improve the sales performance, it's not just training. And I think that's the issue as well.
Yeah. You're like no seriously fizzing piece of blue touch paper with me here, Claire, because yes, I'm absolutely passionate about. I've spoken for the CIPD on a couple of occasions on the issue of making training effective. I was entitled it, can't we just run another training course?
Yeah.
And on both occasions, in fact 3 occasions, I've started off with a quiz, because we've had people in cabaret styles around tables and I have some chocolates and stuff as prizes. And the first question I invariably ask is, how much money was spent in the UK last year on training? And there is always a published number somewhere that you can find. And my second question is, okay, the CIPD has done some research on the percentage of this spend that's wasted. What percentage is it? The table that comes up with the answer that's nearest will get the prize. I never get anything less than 60%. Hang on, let me just shut that up. Oh, it shuts up itself, good. I never get an answer less than 60%. Now, I'm not aware of any stats on the percentage of spend on training that's wasted. But the point is that if L&D professionals feel as a group that 60% or more of spend on training is being wasted, what on earth are we doing about it? Surely we should be focusing on it. So to me, the critical thing is, yeah, what are we doing beforehand to make sure that people are fully engaged and have got their mindset correctly? But what's going to happen afterwards, as Claire said, in terms of embedding, coaching, ensuring that KPIs are being measured, etc., because that's where you're going to get the biggest bangs for your buck in terms of return on investment. And that's where internal L&D really should have a very clear focus and the ability to influence very significantly, because these are the people who should understand these things and be helping sales managers and sales leaders to maximize the return on investment in training, if training is the most appropriate solution.
Well, I'm going to pause and interject there. We're having a fantastic conversation, and Claire and Tim, you've got obviously so much experience and passion, understandably, to draw upon in this area. And Debbie asked, I think, a really good question and a point there about bringing everything together for the business. And in the chat window, we've been talking about that. It's all about kind of going back to actually what is the training need, who are the people involved, and what's the responsibility. So Adrian Logan said in here some really good stuff, going back to what we were talking about at the very beginning of the session about who's responsible. Now, Adrian, if you feel like pressing the unmute button and speaking to this, please do so. If not, don't worry, I'll read your comment and carry on.
Adrian.
Hello, Tim. Hello, Claire. Nice to see you. Yeah. You're both looking
There,
well.
Adrian.
Likewise. Well, here you go.
Yeah.
Thank you, Adrian.
I was going to say, can you see me? I've not got a webcam, so.
I can't see you. In my mind's eye, I can.
Thank you. I think it's an interesting insight into the culture of any organisation when salespeople say, I haven't had any sales training for however long it may be. Yeah, because that then gives an indication that they see the organisation as being paternalistic, and the organisation trains them and is responsible for it. And I think earlier on, I think it was Claire said, there's more of a move now for people to take responsibility for their own personal development. Okay, if they then put their hand up and say, I need training on this, we can then say who's responsible for it. But I believe that the person to initiate that conversation should be the individual. And if the organisation doesn't do it to them, for them, whatever it may be, there's you know, with the internet, YouTube, etc., webinars galore, there's probably too much available, never mind not enough, where people, if they were did have the attitude of self-development, then it would be almost irrelevant what the organisation does for them. Okay, some sweeping generalisations there, which you can all shoot down in flames.
I agree. I do agree with you to a certain extent, Adrian. I think, and also people, even when they go on a training program, for want of a better word, they're going to choose what they learn. We can't force anybody to learn anything because we have to try and get their buy-in and so forth. We know people choose what they learn. So the whole self-directed movement, self-directed learning is fantastic. And certainly in a lot of my programs, I try and build that in because I think it does make a difference. Let people choose what they take for the program because they're only going to take a certain percentage anyway. But then I have been also in organisations whereby I've done the lovely confidence and skills bit before the programme, and it's got worse through the programme because they think they're brilliant. They think they're doing it right. So if there's a culture in the organisation where people don't need training or help even, and that's not even training, it's help, that actually you should be able to do it yourself, and if you can't do it yourself, you're not a very good salesperson. That is so last century comment. I think anybody can be a salesperson. It depends on the industry partly. You can learn the skills and the process and the mindset. If there's no culture that actually says, if I put my hand up, I'm going to get shot down because I'm clearly not good enough. And that's where it comes back to the L&D person being the person to make sure the culture of the organisation is really developing and growing them. So I'm agreeing, and then I'm pushing back on you a little bit to say, actually, if the culture's not there, yes, the individual should still learn themselves, but if they don't even think they need it, it's going to be very, very hard.
Yeah, but maybe this should be the role of the sales manager again, because I can remember, although it was a while ago now, when I first started working from university, the sales manager that I worked for taught me about self-development and why it was important. And one of the things that he sold to me as an idea was to enlist at the local tech college on a certificate in marketing so that I could have a more rounded understanding of commerce and not just sales, which is what I did. And, you know, we know that there's I'll say material on YouTube, because some of it's good, some of it's not so good. You've got to be a little bit discerning to pick the right stuff. But there are a multitude of opportunities out there. There are free seminars that you can attend regionally on sales. Now, again, I wouldn't expect a learning and development professional who is not a specialist in sales arena to know about these. But how much effort would it take if they were approached by a member of the sales team saying, look, I want to improve myself. Where can I go? What can I do? Rather than say, I haven't got a clue. How long would it take to put a quick email onto the TJ forum or on one of the LinkedIn groups to say, look, I need a little bit of help here. Can somebody give me a few ideas? The networks are out there. The resources are out there. The opportunities are out there. It's just a matter of finding where they are, which brings us back to that curator idea again.
Absolutely right. And I think with so much material out there, there's a big discussion around, is it the role of L&D now and changing role of L&D to step into that place? As we were saying about, do we have the sales skills? If I look at myself as example, I've done some sales. Does that make me a sales practitioner? No. Or an expert? No. Does it give me an insight and it's something that I can go and research and bring materials together with a focus? Yes, absolutely. And then working with the expertise, with the sales manager, with the practitioners and so on. Now you mentioned, Tim, about marketing, and I think that whole idea of going on a course that's kind of slightly sidestepping where you are and really expanding your skill set is one that we should all do. And I know, for instance, I listen to things on the radio, I watch things on the telly, I attend webinars that aren't necessarily quite what I'd be interested in, but I always pick up something interesting. Now, there's a question that's come through the question and answer pod. Thank you very much. So this is from Daryl House. Daryl says, what did Claire and Tim think about the healthy tension that sometimes exists between sales and marketing and the development of...
I think, first of all, my top line point is, I think most good salespeople, key account managers, salespeople, key account managers, most of them could do a reasonable job at a marketing career. Most marketeers could do a pretty reasonable bad job of sales. So I don't think it goes across. The marketeers are essential to help sales, but I think a salesperson actually, if they're in particularly key account management, they have to do some marketing and targeting of their people and their areas and understand the value propositions and articulate that. So what marketing is very good at is doing the very high level value propositions and the marketing segments and the focusing and so forth. In many organisations that's done by sales anyway. So when they become separated, it's a real issue which they've had over the last 20 or 30 years. They have got too far separated. And I think marketing is going through a bit of a difficult time at the moment as well of trying to get back into the boardroom, back into the business stuff. But marketing need to help salespeople much more. They're too high level, sales down here, and they have to articulate it. So there's a big gap in the middle. I think the marketeers need to come down closer to the salespeople, but the salespeople always need to tailor to their customers. So I don't think, should there be a healthy tension? If it's a healthy tension, then that's great. They should just they should just talk to each other. Apologies. They just don't talk to each other in many organisations. So it drives me mad, this sales and marketing, because most salespeople can do marketing. Most marketing people cannot do so. That's my line. I'm going to be quite strong about this one. Daryl was trying to be polite. Come on, Daryl, say what you think.
Okay. I must admit, I'm a fan of the sales and marketing director role. There's always going to be a tension between the two because they can think in slightly different ways because of this bigger, wider, more strategic approach that marketing quite often have, because their role is to understand the entire marketplace.
Yeah.
Whereas for a lot of salespeople, their focus is on the individual interaction with the individual customers. It's a different mindset. What I see problematical is where you have a sales director and you have a marketing director and you have disagreements at that kind of level. And that's why I'm quite a fan of somebody at a high level bringing the two functions together. There are going to be occasions where there is a great deal of overlap as well between the two. And in particular, when you're looking at issues like global account management, key account management, where to be successful, the incumbent in the role is going to require certainly a solid understanding of marketing concepts and issues such as positioning, because those roles are about developing and nurturing the long-term relationship. It's the bigger stuff. It's the way that marketing tends to think. So there is an overlap, but there are parts of the organisation when they can be quite distinctly different. But you know that there is no reason why you can't bring the C word to work and do a bit of communicating. Again, looking back in the, I was regional manager in the pharmaceutical industry at one time, and I remember distinctly, we got on quite well with some of the marketeers, believe it or not. And what used to happen was when there was a new campaign coming up, the marketeers used to come to our national management meeting. So all the regional management team would be there, the national sales manager would be there. They'd be sharing their goals, their objectives. They'd be sharing with us the different proposals in terms of the marketing materials that have been received from external agencies. They'd be getting our input, our buy-in, and it worked fantastic. We were working together like that. Quite why that can't happen in more organisations, I don't understand. I was greatly frustrated by a situation a couple of years ago where a client that I was working with, in conversation with the CEO, he said, "Tim, I think I've worked out how to get all the functions operating really well." I said, "Fantastic. What's the idea?" He said, "All the directors in the business are going to have the same objectives. They're going to share each other's objectives. So if one person fails, they all fail." I thought, "Oh, this is going to be really interesting to watch." And then sadly, he was promoted to head office in another country, and I never saw it happen. But I think that would have worked really well. Yeah.
Yeah, I can just imagine that. It's just like, well, that wasn't my fault. That was Bob's fault, actually.
Okay.
And I can see a huge amount of value in that, but also I can see
I
a
was
lot
going to say, in the
of healthy
organisation where it
tension.
works,
Let's use
the
Daryl's term and
salespeople
say
have
healthy
the
tension
terminology
there.
of marketing.
So in the
Most
chat window, we've
salespeople,
got some
who are very
communication.
senior sales
Oh,
director in an
Claire, go on.
organisation has worse terminology of marketing than a lowest level marketeer. And that's shocking. So I think more salespeople should learn more about marketing as well. So I do believe, so I'm not an anti-marketeer at all. But it is shocking when you come across a sales director who doesn't know some of the basic concepts that the lowest certificate in marketing would give it to you. So it's interesting that Tim said that his great line sales manager very early on, he was very lucky that that guy said, go on marketing. I was very lucky that I belonged to the only British manufacturer of computers at the time, which was ICL, which is all key account management. And they sent us on marketing programs as a key account management with Cranfield and people like that, even at quite a young age, 24, 25, 26. So the level of skills, and I know in some of the large companies that's still the same, but there's the language and terminology is so different. And maybe that's also the problem with L&D don't even understand either marketing or sales as well, which goes back to Debbie's point. Is we need to have a bit of a common language and work closer with the business. But it is so I think the sales people do need to know more about marketing, and the marketing need to be more come down a level. The strategic work they do is pretty good most of the time. They need to come down and help the salesperson in the smaller vertical markets, market segments, and so forth. Which tends not to happen a lot. Obviously, it varies across.
And I'd like to build on Lee's comment a little while ago in the box there about customer. That's who should be in the middle of this thing. And fear of throwing a bit of a pebble in the pond, that all of a sudden says, well, hang on a minute, who's in sales? Because if it's about the customer, there are a huge number of people in every organisation who are going to impact on the customer experience. So if you take something like, I know Clare does a lot of work in IT, for example. So if you take IT, sure, you may well have a frontline salesperson who is known as sales in inverted commas. But then you've got people involved with development, implementation, the ongoing contact with the customer is probably going to be with a whole number of different people within the organisation. Now, as all of those people are going to impact on the customer experience, which is going to have a very significant influence on whether people buy more, again, more complex solutions, etc., etc. Maybe there's an argument here that some sales training is relevant to everybody in the business, so that they understand. And this word sales and sales training, You know, for a lot of people, oh, this is the black art now. Oh, it gives you the heebie-jeebies. A lot of it is simply about understanding what you need to do to convey to the customer that you've got an appetite to understand their business needs, their requirements, and you have an appetite to help and support them. Broadly speaking, that's it. And that's appropriate for everybody in the organisation. Yeah.
I think you're right, Tim, and I find it interesting with, as you say, it's that dark art, it's that terminology. I would never in a million years consider myself a salesperson. I don't feel I'm trained, to use the point they made earlier on. I'm not qualified, I'm not experienced in it. But I run my own business now for the last 3 years, and I have a 100% success rate in my sales. And that's because it's about relationships and putting the client at the center of that and building that. So I think those are really good points that you're making. Adrian says in the chat window, good point, Tim, sales training for all.
But I understand why, because the marketeers get scared because they think they're going to be put under pressure. And I think actually the problem with some training sometimes is we have to be careful not to expose anybody, because we're there to support them and move them towards it. And I'm sure Adrian would have handled it pretty well, but that's going to be quite difficult for marketing, because they're going to think, oh, that's not what I do. But that's because one of the things that really winds me up about marketing sometimes is that on the philosophy and the skills, there's the 4 Ps or the 7 Ps or the 8 Ps, whatever it is nowadays, of which it's normally shown as a hierarchy, the 4 Ps, of which one is personal promotion, which personal selling is a subset of that. And hierarchically, it makes sales be seen as less significant than the rest of marketing. I think we should start seeing all those P's as a wheel or a circle. In the middle is sales, because that's what they're all trying to do. The only reason we're doing good customer service and good delivery and good logistics is to either get a return on investment for the business, for the shareholders, or to maintain or create sales of some sort. In a non-profit organisation, it would be more about return on investment. But they should be focused around getting closer to the customer. And again, even the word sales, of course, we could get into thinking of what do we mean by sales. So Tim and I using the word sales in the professional sense of targeting those customers that actually want what we've got and doing a good job, and only selling to customers things that they actually want or need, actually. There is manipulative selling techniques out there, and I can teach them to you, not that I do, but they only work once. We're about repeat long-term business, and that's different as well. And the problem with the word sales is, a lot of people think, oh, I'm not in sales. And then we have to persuade them, actually, there's a difference between manipulative sales and professional sales. And what we're talking about is professionalising the sales force here. And therefore, like I think somebody said in here, I think was it somebody ran a course for all the salespeople, I've just done a program for internal sales, external sales, the product specialists, and the customer services. And they all attended the same introduction to consultative selling. So they understood the terminology and what that organisation actually meant by consultative selling. You need to get the mindset about the terminology first, because it is still quite a scary word out there. And unfortunately, Alan Sugar's not helping very much.
I'll go there.
Thank you, Claire, and thank you, Tim, so far. And now I'd like to come to Geraldine. Geraldine, we've got you on the line. Actually, I've got your picture here, which I must admit I've stolen from LinkedIn. So I thought I'd bring that in just so that people can get a view of who you are.
You have,
well,
and that sounds like a horrible title, doesn't it?
First of all, Geraldine, tell us a little bit about who you are. I think you're academic director
like
at
Tim and Claire,
Consalia. Is that right, if I remembered
sales,
correctly?
Training arena for a number of years. But what we particularly do, and what I do, is I work with Middlesex University on a couple of master's programs, one in sales for sales professionals and one for sales leaders, actually, and a third for key account managers. And just picking up on Claire's point, I mean, one of our sort of goals is to just try and make, well, what we talk about is making sales the world's most sought after profession. It is already the world's oldest profession, and the whole thing about it is the professionalising of it, and don't get me started because no one's going to get a word in now, but the whole thing about professionalising it just drives me spare when you have these people doing such stunning jobs and people don't, the rest of the world don't accept that sales is in fact a highly skilled and highly reputable profession. But B, the other part of that coin is that every single person in the organisation has a sales role, has a sales function. Anybody who is dealing with somebody on the phone, somebody with an external client, has a sales function, whether they're in the accounts department, whether they're on reception, but actually everybody internally also, all of us have a customer, no matter who we are, and it is our responsibility to help. Sales is about making it easier for people to buy. It's not trying to foist on them something that they don't want, and that's unfortunately, as you say, Claire, Alan Sugar has done very little to help us in this area. That's it, rant over.
I think it is a good point. I think the sales word, unfortunately, we haven't really got a new word that can replace sales. And of course, it's interesting, historically, the sales industry did cause a problem in a way itself. Because a bit of history here, which I always think is quite interesting. In the 1920s, when we became production-led as an industry because of the Industrial Revolution, it was great because sales had a great job. They're out there sharing this wonderful product. Everyone was biting off their hands and taking the 4T model. You can have it in any colour as long as you have it in black. And of course, then in the 1950s, of course, what happened is production got so far ahead, supply was greater than demand. And then the salespeople out on the road then began to do all those dodgy dealings. And therefore, sales became seen as forcing people to sell stuff that had just come off the factory floor because they had to, because there was such a long lead time. And that's why marketing came out as a terminology, because marketing, of course, came out in the 60s, and it was all about marketing focused on the needs of the customer, where selling focused on the needs of the seller. Now, in our industry, and certainly in our philosophy of profession of sales, we're saying we are obviously focusing on the needs of the customer. But that's where sales, so I think it's interesting to see the history, because that's actually what marketing see themselves as being different from sales. They see salespeople. I think that old-fashioned view of sales is still out there, and that's why it's still seen as being quite manipulative and unprofessional. And it would be nice if we'd come up with a new word, but I think it's just professional sales, I suppose, is the best word we can come up with. I absolutely agree with what Geraldine said.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll endorse what Geraldine said as well. I think the problem, Claire, is exacerbated by how sales is portrayed in the media.
Absolutely.
I know Dr. Beth Rogers at Portsmouth Uni has done some work looking at the portrayal of, well, I was going to say portrayal of professional sales. It's not professional sales that's portrayed in the media, but if you think of
the banking
Half
world
a
as
Day,
well,
Tin Men, the film Tin Men, and all the other ones,
yeah.
they portray the worst side of sales. And unfortunately, all of us have been at the end of some terrible salesmanship. It breaks my heart when I'm out buying a new car. And that's what we tend to remember.
Yeah.
You know, the guys who are really good, really professional, who, to pick up on the point Geraldine made, which I absolutely agree with, who are really good at helping customers to buy the right thing, it kind of doesn't feel like sales because we think sales is something unpleasant. And that's why if you say to a lot of people who aren't in a formal sales role, for want of a better phrase, you're part of the sales team, they go, oh, no, I don't want to be like that. Oh, I don't want to be Arthur Daly. Well, no, you don't want to be Arthur Daly, and that's quite right. I had a fascinating assignment a couple of years ago now in the scientific sector. The job basically was the CEO wanted the directors to get better at consultative sales. And now these are all people with PhDs, they're scientists, and the first job we had was to ensure they understood that sales wasn't the way that they understood sales. Once we got that barrier down, we said, really? Is that what it's about? Well, yes, it is. It's about helping the customer to buy the right thing. Digressing for a moment now, again, when I was working as an internal trainer, I can remember distinctly going down to the guys on the reception desk. So this was an outsourced security company, the same two guys that were there day in, day out. And I went down to them and said, guys, I've got to tell you, you are two of the best salespeople this company have got. And they were horrified. They said, no, we're security men, we're not sales. I said, look, everybody that comes to meet me, you make such a positive first impression about the company and the way that you communicate the brand, which is a marketing thing, the way that you communicate the brand of the company does us proud. You are the best sales ambassadors we've got. So I know I'm kind of repeating myself here, But it's important that everybody in the organisation understands that they contribute to the customer experience. They are part of the overall sales effort of the organisation. And coming back to the original question that this webinar is based on, maybe internal L&D professionals have a responsibility to actually provoke the organisation to understand a little bit more about how important it is for people to understand sales a little bit better.
That's a good point that we've just discussed there, everyone, is, if it's everybody's job to sell the organisation, it's everybody's job to be a brand and an ambassador for the organisation, then surely everybody needs to know a little bit of everything else, which goes back to that point about, well, I'm in sales, but I went on a marketing course and so on. I think there's some really interesting stuff there. And I know certainly in my own roles, as I say, not really direct sales roles per se, I've always had, to be honest, I've been told off a lot in my roles because I've always been interested, like, oh, what's over there and what are they doing, rather than doing my own work, which I know has to be managed and things like that. But the benefit of that has been a really broad interest and understanding of the whole industry and the business that I'm in. And it actually allowed me to take a consultative role in learning and development and sales, but also to be able to talk to somebody really broadly about what I'm doing and the brand itself. And I think when I see pockets of people doing that, it really, really makes me happy. Now, I think a really interesting point that actually Claire put in the chat window, we've been talking about car sales. I'm not going to tell you my car sales story. But Claire just said in the chat window, my local car salesman told me they were no longer on commission. It was all about feedback from customers. And this is something that I've been really interested in for a long time, is the idea of having a much more customer relationship based version of sales, to go back to that professional sales point. My sister-in-law works for a gym company as a personal trainer, and it's all about the feedback, which is great, but ultimately they're commission paid. So it makes them a salesperson, not about the customer feedback. I think it's 50-50 for her. Is this the way forward for professional sales?
I'll make two, probably three really important points. The one is I completed a master's degree in strategic sales management. As part of my literature review, I searched for information on incentive programs related to key account management. Do you know, when you actually look for objective evidence that demonstrates that there is a very clear link between paying incentives and getting the right sales results and sales behaviours, there's not a lot of really good objective data there. There's plenty of data that demonstrates that it drives the wrong behaviours in the business. Again, a quick one for you. I can remember flying out from Bournemouth Airport, our local airport, on holiday a few years ago, and everybody in the queue was having a problem checking in. And it became very clear that the operative behind the desk who was checking the bags in was on an incentive program to charge more. So they were looking really actively, and they were giving the customer a totally miserable experience. I was privileged enough to go and visit British Gas in Cardiff, who have won on a number of occasions, the accolade European Call Centre of the Year. I interviewed the leader of the business there, and one of the things that they've done is strip the sales targets out of the business, and performance has gone up, because people are now measured on what's important, and that's the customer experience, customer feedback.
Thank you. I think that's a really good way of putting that, Tim. Thank you. Now, Geraldine, we lost you there for a second, but I'm glad to say we've got you back, which is fabulous news. So, Geraldine, we've just been talking about this point of, for professionalising sales, should we remove the sales commission target and have it focused on customer feedback or other appropriate
sorry, Joe, can you just say the question again?
So you might just need to connect your audio again, Geraldine. There you go.
Well, it's really interesting, as I put in the chat, we're now seeing that with a number of clients that commission-based sales is going, and that there are different reward structures. And in fact, a couple of our students have done their master's dissertations based on that. And, you know, it is really interesting, but it's also so ingrained, I think, in behaviour and custom and practice that it's going to be a slightly longer haul. But certainly for, I mean, you know, in Clare's world, in the world of complex sales, it's just not as simple. It's not as simple as that.
There's so many people involved with sale, aren't there? As you talked about before.
Exactly. And at the end of the day, it comes back down to being everyone's responsibility. And
I'd also like to add in.
No, Karen, Tim.
Sorry, Geraldine. I was going to say, I'd also like to add in at this juncture, I think we are beginning to focus on what I think is a terribly badly done thing generally in business, and that is a lack of sales management training. Because the issues that we're talking about, this is about bad sales leadership. You know, sales leaders putting the wrong environment around the sales team. And this is why I rather admire the work of Consalia here, Geraldine, because I know you're focusing on this area. If we had sales leaders within the business who better understood how to actually create the environment which drives the right behaviours, not only to achieve high quality and quantity of sales, but also to embellish the customer experience, we'd be a lot better off. But for some reason, it doesn't happen.
I think on that point, Tim, that is a fantastic part of which to end. That whole idea of actually it's about culture, it's about leadership, and it's about everyone having responsibility on that. Can you believe the last hour has disappeared? Just now it was 10:45 and now we're at time. I can't believe it. This has been an absolutely brilliant session. Thank you so much, Tim. Thank you so much, Claire, and Geraldine as well for jumping in there as well. We heard from Debbie, we heard from Adrian as well. That was all absolutely brilliant to hear from you guys. Now, in the on the page now, you've got some links there around giving you some information about Tim and Claire, so you can get in contact with them if you like. Also, you've got some information there about Give Back UK, who have been sponsoring our launch week, and we're really proud of our association with them. Thank you very much. Our next session will be, our recording will be available on our webinars page, and you can go and have a look at that. We'll have that up there hopefully later on today. You can also continue that conversation if you want to on Twitter. That would be really good to continue sharing and discussing this. And our next webinar is tomorrow. We've got a whole week of our webinars, so it's tomorrow at 10 AM UK time, and it's all about neuroscience, and we picked up on some of those things about research and responsibility